You're listening to Heal Through Humor, hosted by yours truly, Talia Bombola. I'm a licensed therapist on a mission to help others learn about themselves and laugh along the way. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Heal Through Humor podcast. I cannot wait for you all to meet today's guest. We have connected via Instagram, and we do very similar jobs, but we are very different people. So, I'm really excited to introduce you to Barry Selby. He also helps women heal from heartbreak and discover their most authentic self and be their most authentic self in a relationship. It's going to be a wonderful interview. I'm going to bring him in right now. As always, if you have any questions, pop them in the comments below. This is a podcast, so any questions that you ask will be answered in more of a podcast format. And afterwards, when this gets posted, if you have any other questions, you can also pop in and add them, and Barry and I will be happy to answer them. So let's see if Instagram will cooperate and if Barry is able to come in. Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thank you. How's your day going?
It's been busy.
Yeah, same.
Clubhouse room that was first time I've done it, and they wanted me to lead and converse, and I got some great content now I can pull out of that. Then my web show I do every Thursday, so this is my third interaction, which is fun to do. So I'm glad to be here.
Perfect. It's been very back to back. I've had clients before and then this to kind of break up my day, and then I have clients a couple after, and then I'm free. Then it's my weekend.
On a Thursday, good time to start.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So why don't you introduce yourself for those people who don't quite know you as well as we've gotten to know each other on Instagram. I'd love to know what you do.
Indeed, yeah. Well, my name is Barry Selby, in case you didn't know. From the fact, it says the real Barry Selby is my handle. I'm known as the love doctor to my clients and friends, and that's what Clubhouse has branded me as now, which is kind of fun.
Perfect.
But I'm a love and relationship expert, officially best-selling author, inspirational speaker, and spiritual guide. Background in spiritual psychology, been on the personal development field for 30-something years, and made lots of mistakes over the years. And then in 2007, had a profoundly life-changing experience, amongst many experiences, that really opened me up to the masculine and feminine conversation, which is why I'm now dedicated to serving women in their feminine as my calling in life. So that's the very brief synopsis.
I'm dying to know what this was of this enlightenment to awaken you to this career and life path change, perhaps.
It was actually because of a relationship, a really messy breakup. And the thing about it was the third one in a row where the same thing kind of happened, or I should say the same experience for me that's the one thing I talk about a lot in my work, is that we tend to do serial relationships. If we don't learn the lesson, we'll do it the next one, the next one, the next one. Yeah. And I've been in the personal growth field and spiritual development for 30 plus years. And what I didn't realize I was doing, I was moving more and more into my feminine, but I didn't know what that was. I mean, masculine and feminine was not in my vocabulary or in my understanding at that point. And in my path, I was raised in a fairly old-fashioned paradigm, coming from England, Jewish background. My dad was kind of, I won't say, macho implies very butch, very bullish sort of way, but my dad was macho in the sense he was very stoic and closed-hearted and getting things done, and wasn't very connected.
Okay.
And growing up being the eldest in my family, the younger brother, I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to copy that. So I actually became more towards my mother and becoming actually more softer. I was kind of the nice guy. Yeah. And that was the way I lived up until 2007, or 2006 rather. And every relationship I got into, ultimately the last three in particular, I dated very strong women who were dynamic, who basically, they were in the masculine, I was in my feminine. In hindsight, I saw that. I didn't see it at the time.
Right.
That third relationship, she basically called me on it, because the other two didn't say anything about it. We just broke up.
Right.
And now I look back and go, if only I'd known back then, I could have saved a bunch of years, and possibly relationships.
Yeah.
So that last breakup, she basically accused me of not being the guy she thought I was going to be. She thought I was going to be strong and in leadership, but she ran the show once we got dated, and I was totally fine being the passive, nice guy. After that breakup, I was going, okay, God, give me a sign, something, a clue, because I had done all this work and I knew all these things, and I had a master's degree in spiritual counseling, all these skills, but I was missing something.
Yeah.
And so a few months after that breakup, I happened to be walking out of the spiritual center I go to in LA, And this woman was walking towards me, and she was glowing. She was radiating. She was like, I mean, she was very attractive too. But in 2007, my comfort level talking to good-looking women wasn't very, very strong. You know, I was kind of shy that way. But she was like gorgeous, blonde, tan, white sundress, and it was as if there was spirit putting a sign over it saying, "Talk to this woman," like neon signs. So, okay, I got to say something. I don't know how, and I said to her something like, "Excuse me, I know we don't know each other, but you're glowing. Where have you been?" That's kind of what I said, which cracked up, of course. She then told me she'd come back from this retreat, which I found out afterwards the whole journey into the masculine and feminine conversation. And that put me on the journey where I started studying different teachers, master teachers in the area of masculine and feminine polarity. And it was like my eyes were open. Suddenly we're going, oh, now I get where I was out of alignment.
Yes.
And once I understood, because up to that point, I thought there was either the nice guy or the bad boy, you know, the soft guy and the macho guy.
Yes.
But when I discovered masculine man, which is kind of is kind of above both of those, or was separate from both of those, I was like, that's where I've been missing, and that's where I wanted to claim. So, and part of that work, knowing that being a masculine man, was what's my why? Why am I here? What's my calling? Because a masculine man must have purpose. That's kind of a requirement, which is why I dedicate my life to serving the feminine, because that was part of the training, by the way. At the end of the 3 days, in the first one I took, we had the men and women standing on separate sides of the room. The men have been practicing all weekend masculine practices, women feminine practices. Come together, 50 men, 50 women, roughly, facing each other, expressing ourselves naturally in our authentic natures. And when I saw this wall of femininity in front of me, that was the life-changing moment. That was the moment where I was like, okay, this is what I am so dedicated to serving, because I saw the magnificence, the power, the sexiness, the joy, the exuberance of the feminine energy. And I was like, I need to help support that in my life. So,
well, thank you to the glowing lady who entered your life, because
yeah, her name's Kim. We became good friends after that.
it wasn't just like ethereal one time.
No, she's real.
Gosh, we're like, is this real? Yeah, polarity is so hugely both internally in your own relationship with ourselves and externally transformational. It's a lot I work with my clients on as well. The very high achieving, high alpha women, very strong in the masculine energy and very skilled, run very well run businesses, very lucrative. But there's that recovering people pleaser, the recovering high achiever, where they're tired and they really want to rest, but rest feels guilt inducing. It feels not the same when they don't have a male counterpart. And I think them going on their own journey towards understanding what energy they're in. For some clients, they have no clue and they're like, wait, there's different energies. And then for others, they're like, and before you say it, I know I'm in my masculine. I've been trying to fix very masculine energy to try and get out of it. I'm like, so that's just going to keep you further in it. We have to completely shift gears in the way that you're thinking about, have more ease and flow, which is terrifying for women who had practiced with that before.
Well, the thing is, and also because of that, the men they'll attract will either be opposite, which means they'll be in the feminine, or they'll find men who won't actually allow them to be in the masculine. They'll actually in a way, want to be controlling. Because one of the challenges for men is, for a lot of men, being around strong women is scary.
Yes.
Or unsettling. So that for a lot of men, to trust that is not something they're used to. And for me, thankfully, having done this work now, I work with similar sort of women, is that I get now, for one thing, women have been trained, or should I say women have been in the flow since the mid-60s, 70s after sexual revolution, to go out and live their own lives, have their own work, be successful. But the thing is, they weren't trained or taught or educated how to navigate that and have a relationship. It's kind of either or.
Yeah.
So what you said is, like, for so many women, they don't even have the awareness as a choice, and that they can actually be, and this is one thing I talk about a lot, if women knew just how powerful the feminine was, they would never focus on their masculine as a priority. Yes, we do carry both, to underscore that point internally, as you said. But I talk about masculine and feminine being a spectrum that we live on, but we also move in between. We don't live in one spot all the time. That we have natural residence at one end or the other by preference or by alignment. And for women, when they're in the masculine, they sometimes forget how to, they're not even aware of the fact they could be in the feminine and be even more powerful, just a different way.
Yes. Yeah. It's a more of a, what is it's Theodore Roosevelt, speak softly but carry a big stick. It's more of this like presence and energy and powerful calmness, similar to, I see couples as well in my therapy practice, and then the yelling and screaming back and forth, nothing's getting accomplished.
Right.
Powerful is it to be calm and quiet and look the partner in the eye on eye level and say, I have something really serious to talk to you about. Even that shift, I may not want to hear it, but I will be more inclined to listen because it's a more commanding presence, but it doesn't feel overpowering. And I think that's the balance to strike often with women I'm working with. They stay single for at least some time in the beginning because they're on this deep, deep journey. And like you're mentioning, when we're in a certain flow or lack thereof, we tend to be magnetically attracted to or attractive to maybe not an ideal partner long term. Everybody serves their purpose in our life along the way, but there's this transformation internally that is ongoing. And then we see the shift in who they're picking, how they should work, what tasks they're offloading, how much they enjoy, typically towards a few months into the work. But in the beginning, like, I had to relax and it was awful and I didn't do at all. I just had to be. And it can be suffocating at first.
Yep.
I know I've lived that. That's a lifelong journey for myself as well, having a very strongly cultivated masculine. Feminine was something that I still have to learn and practice.
Well, I want to make sure something is made very clear, because we've been in this culture, we've been portrayed that the feminine is weaker than the masculine, which is say because women are physically generally weaker. However, a couple of caveats. First of all, women's pain tolerance is way stronger than men's. Just to be clear, we'll jam a finger and be screaming our lungs out, but a woman gives birth to a baby. So there's a difference in scale. Just to be clear. Yeah. Secondly, the way one of my teachers puts it is, I love the analogies my teachers have given me. One of them is that the feminine energy, basically, it's called Mother Nature, not Father Nature. Meaning that nature, which is an infinite power, which includes earthquakes, tsunamis, tornadoes, hurricanes, is feminine. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of power. And the thing with masculine is we are very powerful too, but we are more, I would say, linear, single focus. One of the strengths of the masculine is direction and clarity. The feminine has the gift of embracing much more than that. But the thing about it is that there's the dance, and I love using Argentine tango as my model for how to explain how masculine and feminine works together in unity, because there's so much required from both sides to work together. But the thing about the feminine, couple of visuals. One, we're putting it in. I live in LA, and 5 months ago, it was a while ago when we had the container ships out on the ocean that were backed up; they couldn't get into dock.
Yes.
And that image of all these container ships, the masculine is like those container ships, big, ponderous, slow-moving, that basically take 3 miles to turn. That's kind of the way the men are functionally, so to speak. But the feminine is the ocean it sits on. The power of the feminine is so much more than that. The thing is, because men have been, because we live in patriarchy, puts the males like being the stronger, it's been valued as stronger. Yes, physically we can be stronger, but the true strength comes from within, which is feminine. And so when we understand how powerful women are in the feminine, not to be competitive and combative with the men, but to be different, and when the respect that is due is provided, that's when we can really embrace the feminine on the planet.
Yes, I'm curious to learn from you your thoughts and experiences with emasculation, both, and perhaps if you want to share personally, if it happened, as well as I see it a lot in the women I work with as a way to almost reorchestrate the perceived power dynamic in their relationships. That's sometimes a very effective technique in business, but it has its place that it needs to stay at work. And we're often either modeled implicitly or explicitly by our parents and that dynamic unit, or sometimes lack thereof. What does it look like to have power in a relationship? And what does it look like to have parents who are at the turn or the cusp of 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s? All of the decades have an impact on, I think, how we show up as well. So I would love to have a discussion with you about the concept of emasculation.
Sure. How much time do we have?
So let's dive in.
Let's dive in. Okay. So first of all, let's put a bit of history on this stuff. We've been in a cultural shift, because back in, my parents' generation, back in the 50s and before, women didn't have freedom to do what they wanted to do. They basically lived at their parents' house until the man would court her, and then she would fall in love and they get married. They move into his house, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So the change didn't happen until, again, sexual revolution in the 60s and 70s in England, the women's liberation movement and that sort of thing, and it shifted the culture. But unfortunately, there wasn't necessarily any training wheels like for the women. It's kind of like they were thrust into business. And I remember back in when I was a kid, when Twiggy was famous in England as being like the model of the new strong woman. You know, she had padded-shouldered suits on, short haircut, flat makeup, and basically had no sexual presence at all.
Right.
By copying the men. So women had been trained, and you know, is it 1971? I think women got bank accounts first time.
Yeah. Yes.
Or credit cards, either one of those two. So women's freedom to be themselves and equal in sense is less than, it's just what, 50 years old? Not that long ago.
Yeah.
So we are definitely going through changes, and we're in the middle of it now, just to be clear.
Very true.
The challenge for women has been, though, is that, and I talked about this as well, the business world was created by men. It was really designed for men. And women have been trying to fit into it ever since. They've been trying to copy the men. So being powerful was actually women copying the men, which frankly is confining to their energy, just to be clear. But when women are doing that, they're getting things done and making things happen, and they're being very successful, as long as they're focused on being like the men, because they're not being sexual objects there. They're being focused and being competitive. And again, it's like they're sort of banging heads against each other. The problem is also for a lot of women is that they would go out to happy hour to meet guys they would date, but they didn't turn off that way of being. So the relationship became competitive and combative.
Yes.
Rather than having a dance of nuance and sexuality and connection. Now, the sex could be fun temporarily. I had that experience many years ago in that with women, but the functional relationship was never there. It was never built on a firm foundation because it was just both on the same side in a way, some way, both masculine energies. And again, women have not been informed loudly enough that their feminine is more powerful than their masculine. So women haven't been claiming it or owning it. So they've been living in that way of being like the men. And of course, when they find a man who they can be with, it's kind of who outranks who in the masculine scale, which is all, again, one-sided. It's not balanced.
Right.
So part of the thing I've learned, and this one, I've worked with quite a few, Alison Armstrong, David Data, John Gray, Satya and Suzanne Raja in Vancouver, good friends of mine. I've worked with them. So I've really dived in deep some of these amazing teachers that I highly recommend and I talk about a lot. What Alison Armstrong talks about is one of the challenges. Yeah, she
entire life. I love that woman.
I'm on actually. My video came out today for a summit I'm on that she was on as well, and her conversations because she just recently got into a new relationship, and when she talks about that relationship, it's cracking me up because she's so owning her work.
Yes.
Expressing what she's learning. It's like, oh, I know this. It's so fun to watch. So anyway, she talks about, and I was actually in a course with her last November. I was in one of her programs. She's really cool. I love her a lot. But she talks about how when a woman's upset, this piece I want to use as an illustration because it talks about how men don't know how to be with a woman.
Correct.
When she's in her feminine. When a woman is upset and she's expressing her upset, Alison talks about having the basket or the bucket that the man holds the character to receive her upset.
Yes.
What men tend to do, though, instead of doing that, is they want to like cut her off or fix it or run away.
Then let's move past. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's no space allowed, first of all. So the problem is on both sides of the equation. For women, they're not sure how to be in their feminine because it's not been safe before. And secondly, to make it unsafe, men aren't used to being around women in their feminine. So they're not sure how to deal with it because they're used to being women either being like meek housewife types or like Ben, Masco, like one of the boys, one of the guys. And also, again, a lot of men, like I was, had a choice point of being the nice guy or being the bad boy. So no wonder we had problems in relationship,
Right.
So part of the evolution is that we're starting to recognize, more and more people recognize it for men, when we step beyond the bad boy or the nice guy and become masculine men, which, to break it apart, the macho guy, I've defined it this way, is the macho guy is like big ego and balls.
Yes.
Just kind of neck up and then balls, and that's it. That's the macho guy. Not emotionally available, not connected, and really selfish, ultimately.
Yes.
In a good way. The masculine man, the way I've learned and I've really owned this place, is a man who has an open heart, the compassion and care for the world and making a difference, and a spine that is straight, which is his direction and clarity and purpose. And that visual, that physiological experiences, like how can we define the differences?
Right.
The nice guy's kind of open heart, but no balls, no direction, no strength, which is what I was for many years. So I know how incomplete that was.
Mm-hmm.
So part of it's the men have a need or requirement to step into the masculine because, frankly, the models in the world don't teach us that very well.
Right.
Most of them we watch are living in the macho, selfish, not cooperating, or being the nice guys who are being pushovers. Or was that just me? Whereas women, again, haven't been informed or haven't owned their feminine gifts in the world, which we need more and more. There aren't to be honest, there aren't very many women models out there teaching the feminine in the way that works for the world either.
True.
So our conversation hopefully goes to a wider audience so that we can awaken people to the possibility because it's worth it.
I've seen such transformation with the both couples I've worked with where I've borrowed from David Data and Alison Armstrong and all the books that and authors that are like on my bookshelf in the other room. And I'm like, feels so good. Like even my nervous system was like, he gets it. This is so nice to talk to someone who gets it. That feeling for them to understand we don't think the way that you do. You don't think the way that we do. It doesn't mean we can't learn and teach and grow with and from one another. How can we put our armor down? How can we put those defensive structures down and that defensive self-reliance that does get activated when we are interacted with in a way where either we feel emasculated if we have a really strong masculine energy, or we're unintentionally, this used to be my pattern without even knowing it before I was introduced to Alison Armstrong's work. How was I emasculating men, thinking that it was sexy, thinking it was funny, whatever it may have been attributed to? I had zero clue what the impact was because I was so stuck in feeling like men were less than, they were incompetent, they were incapable. It not only had been modeled in my perception in my own family system, back on TV back, and then there were so many other cultural and personal influences. It was hard not to have those beliefs, but it was the best thing I ever could have done for myself. My relationship with my dad, with my brother, with my male friends, my partner, my work. It was the single-handedly most transformational experience that I still am on and will continue to go through. How are you different than me? And how can I honor that without feeling like I'm threatened or I'm less than, or I will be taken advantage of if I give deference to and respect to the male and masculine energy? And I can tell, being around women who haven't done any of the work, based on how they talk about their partners or about men. And I kind of, silently smile of like, there's hope for you. I used to be you at one time. And it doesn't sound like you're very open or receptive, which is like the fourth most important quality that Alison talks about as well, that receptivity. And that's where my realization of confidence and assertiveness comes in. That was even, I had been doing that before I even knew about the list of like the 12 traits that men look for most in women. And I remember listening to a podcast and she's like, okay, it's confidence and it's being authentic and then it's being passionate and then it's being receptive. But if you don't have that, you'll turn off. And I literally paused it, sat down on the trail, and I was like, oh my, okay, I understand now. Like I understand where I was going right and where I was detouring and like still veering off to the emasculation path, and laying the sword down and not doing that anymore allows, I think, me to guide other women towards that. And I resonate and I relate. And there are times where each of us, the archetype of male or female, we do mess up and fit the typical stereotype because we're at the end of the day, and as evolved as we might like to think we are, we have regressions, we have slip-ups, we have triggers and activations that push us back into our less effective selves. How can we as a whole system and as individuals in a relationship give grace to that and understand, especially a guy at certain ages cannot give you everything a guy at another age or age bracket, I guess, if you will, could give. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. I was talking to a client a couple of days ago about the expectation we have as young women being born into society. If our father is present in our life, depending on the quality of the relationship, the decade or era he is in when he is parenting has a large influence on the template that we use to compare or contrast who we want to date and be with. Well, my dad gives me all of these things. Let's say it's a positive relationship and he expects you to hold the door for me and pay and this, and we're not with the right stage of development of man to have that be consistent. We're not all going to be able to date the way that we perceive that we want to be dating. And then instead of shaming the person for not being that, how can we see and accept, oh, you know, I work with a lot of college age girls. I'm like, he's in a frat. Like the expectations of him planning a wedding are 0 to none. And there's nothing wrong with that. 15, 20 years, you're going to have a different conversation. If you met him in that time, it would be completely different. And it's how do we go about acknowledging and releasing it without emasculating them? It's like this final like hiss before we leave.
Oh yeah, that's we've got 17 things I can pull apart. Let's start with the being raised by the father piece.
Yes.
Many women tend to attract men who remind them of their fathers.
Yes.
Not necessarily in a good way, because and this is something I got from my background in psychology, was understanding this, and Bruce Lipton talks about this too, is that we don't, well, that's the way I say it, we don't come in with user manuals. When we show up and our parents are like, what do we do with this thing?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, even if you're the second child, there's still, what's what looking for? Learning curve.
Yeah.
So we are basically, as babies and up until about 5, 6 years old, like sucking on the teat of knowledge, trying to figure out how things work. We're learning from what our parents do, how they act. You know, we learn how to walk, watching how they walk. We learn how to eat, watching how they eat, all that sort of stuff, including watching how they relate to each other.
Correct.
So if the parents are still together when you're a kid, because some kids didn't have that.
Right.
And even in the absence, there's a learning there too. But kids were basically imprinted by how the parents interact with each other. And that's what loving is programmed in as, because up until about 5, 6 years old, we aren't choosing for ourselves yet. We're still just taking everything like a sponge, like how does life work? What's work going on? Take it in. Then at some point, again, 4 or 5, 6 years old, somewhere in there, our conscious mind, so to speak, our frontal cortex comes online and becomes the gatekeeper deciding what we want to believe. Which sounds great, except that up until that point, there's a warehouse of knowledge behind it.
Yes.
That's running the show automatically. This is autopilot.
Correct.
So then as adults, the wonderful thing is we are very good at defaulting to automatic behavior, programming that we've been on since we were babies. So oftentimes we will start choosing, not as kids, but with the lens through which we saw our parents as a kid.
Right.
We should attract relationship. And so what happens is, we won't do this intentionally, of course. We're not looking on dating apps looking for certain behaviors. But the wonderful gift is that we tend to magnetically attract those reciprocal things we saw from our parents.
Right.
And we wonder why. And the biggest clue to this is when you start noticing a relationship sequences where the same thing happens each time. That's the big clue.
Yes.
And for me, and just speak from personal experience, my early dating life, and looking back history is like so interesting looking back. I didn't know as a teen, as a young adult, that you can actually have an argument whilst you're in a relationship. In fact, I was in the place where if we had an argument, I would quit the relationship every single time. Happened several times in relationships, like short term, 1 month, 2 month, 3 month dating. Be an argument, I quit.
Yep.
Well, my upbringing was my parents didn't argue in front of the kids. My programming was love didn't include arguing. That was just the way it was wired. And I mean, now I look back in hindsight, great, wonderful. At the time, I had no clue. You know, I didn't know about makeup, sex, or any of that stuff.
Right.
So in that context of understanding that my wiring was informing my choices, I had to do some good news is, as an adult, I could do some rewiring and undo that programming, because I didn't know that you could even have that work. So that was one of the things I watched. And so if somebody was in a family where there was abuse in the wiring, whether it's verbal, spiritual, sexual, whatever it was, they'll tend to attract partners that mirror that back to them, because that's the tie into love they have.
Correct.
It's hardwired on almost. So you'll do deep work to heal it in the first place. The good news, though, is that even though, and oftentimes, by the way, those patterns you learn from your parents, they learn from their parents, because there's a pattern that gets passed down generationally.
Yes. Is
that as an adult, especially if you're listening to this sort of conversation, you can change the wiring once and for all. You can end the behaviors and close the loop, so you can move forward freely. And then any kids you have, don't carry forward.
Yes.
That piece is huge.
Being able to, I think that's very shocking for some people to hear that rewiring subconscious beliefs not only changes their immediate life, any lineage that comes from them from there on out. It's powerful work. It's exhausting. I know I've been on the personal journey myself. I feel like it's been a task or a role that I look at, so many generations before. It runs in the family. It runs in the family, right? I feel like my upbringing and adolescence and adulthood was like, okay, and this is where it runs out, because this is far too chaotic. It's far too uncomfortable, and it's not serving me in a way where I can still serve others or be present in a way that's not very painful. And rewiring the subconscious beliefs, it can happen in small ways. It doesn't have to be this massive overhaul where you take a month off of your life and redo it all, because I can guarantee it's not all going to be discovered. Going back
It was only that easy.
right, oh my God, feel like in a little egg, like a vacuum sealed, and just undownload, re-download. It takes a while. It takes a process. It takes shadow work. It's going to look completely different. Who you are on the other side of a lot of this reprogramming is remarkably, in positive ways, completely different than who you recognize yourself to be. And that alone is a very uncomfortable process, but it is positive. The more years you get under your belt looking back, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful I have come so far to not be that person anymore, to not even, if I were in the room with former me, I'd be like, no, like, I don't want to be around you anymore. This is not energy I want to be near. Your childhood. That's why I love psychoanalytic therapy and psychodynamic therapy.
Yeah.
That framework and what you're describing in that framework is called repetition compulsion. Whatever you did not get a chance to master in your childhood, or wish you could have said to a parent, a friend, whomever, a teacher, does become this thing that you manifest and create in your adult life. And how you wish you could have responded then shows up in adult you. And there's these sometimes 2-decade long patterns that are needing to be healed. And so we keep picking the partner who has those traits that we can overcome in an attempt to finally master it. And once you're on the other side of that, a lot of the women I work with go for the dark triad guys, the dark triad personality traits, the bad boys. They are edgy, and they've gotten in a relationship with them when they're very young, and now at 45 it's not sexy anymore that they have the motorcycle and they're reckless and they're not on time.
Right.
They're starting to see a collapse of I'm now changing. He is not. He's in fact deepening in these traits that are no longer sexy to me.
Right.
Gives. And I think the self-growth journey leads you on some very intense paths, all worthwhile, and you will meet your true self on the other side.
Absolutely. And by the way, that thing, that's why they're called bad boys, not bad men.
Correct.
Very immature. And so you definitely outgrow them.
Yes.
We should say you're advised to outgrow them. If you don't, you're going to get stuck in a place where you don't want to be either.
No, and the likelihood of perpetuating that dynamic, I often work with parents, oh, they were just 2. And I'm sitting there and I get Botox, thankfully, because otherwise the facial expressions, I don't think I'd be employed by my clients with like ultimate shock. And being
I'm too transparent. I can't do that.
Yeah. With my hands in my face. If my mouth doesn't say it, my face sure will. That they kind of write it off. Oh, they were just an infant. I'm finishing a developmental psychoanalytic training year where we go over infant, child, and adolescent psychoanalysis. You can do psychoanalysis on an infant and watch the way, does the mom try and remain in eye contact with the baby if they look away? Can she not talk? This goes so deep to these really foundational 0 to 5 years. If anything, I tell parents, like, that's the time I need you to focus the most. And then we can almost let our foot off the gas pedal as we bring in other forms of raising a child, school, friends, parents, etc. Right. It's so foundational to lay that subconscious blueprint that your child will ultimately keep because they like parts of it, or chances are higher that they'll have to unwire and rewire a large part of it as well, because it doesn't apply anymore in today's society to have that archetypal, Enneagram type 5 logical man who goes home to work and brings home the bacon, and then the woman stereotypically fries it in the pan, the like type 2 helper giver. I'm just here, I'm around, I don't have my own needs or anything, I'll just serve the whole family. It can't fit anymore in society today, I don't believe anyway.
No, it's generationally, it's way past due. There's so much that's changed. One thing I'll speak to also about the way we think. That's something you mentioned earlier as well. One of the there's a video series on YouTube I love watching. This is from a seminar probably 10, 12 years ago now at least. by a minister back east called Mark Gungor.
Mm.
It's called Tale of Two Brains, and it is hysterically funny. He's a very funny guy, but he did a piece, and it was I think the recording was the preview of the weekend event. I'm not sure it was the whole weekend,
Right.
but it's been to congregation, and he basically had on stage on the dais, he had two like 3 foot tall little pillars, and on top of each one he had a phrenology, the porcelain skulls, heads.
Mm-hmm.
And on one of them, it had like lipstick and a scarf, and the other one was plain. So one was a woman's brain, one was a man's brain. And he did this thing. I mean, he did lots of things in the workshop, but the one thing that stuck out to me was about the wiring we carry, which is the programming. And so the way men's brains think and stores memories, the way women's brains think and store memories are very different. And when you get this, it's like, oh, this is so much makes more sense. Because you talk about how, when you ask a man, how was the journey? It's like, I arrived, it's great. Whereas when you ask a woman how the journey was, she said, well, there was this signpost and there was this sunset and there's this sort of thing.
Right. Diffuse awareness, right.
Right, because the way that it works, the way he talks about the wiring, which I love this analogy, is that in a man's brain, all the memories are stored in separate boxes. Little boxes all floating in space, not touching each other. So you ask a man a question, he would go in his mind, find the one box with the answer, take the box out carefully, open it, give it the answer, put it back in the box, put it back in, nothing to touch. So it's isolated on its own.
Mm-hmm.
Woman's brain, it's one long continuous wire. Everything's connected. So you ask a question about one thing, she'll find the point on the wire, and everything around it gets included.
Yeah.
So understanding that difference about the way men and women relate and think of things, rather than thinking you don't think like I am, you don't think like I do, so there's something wrong with you.
Mm.
If you shift the idea of understanding that we're just simply different and we can enjoy the differences, that's the key, by the way.
Yes.
It makes it much easier to understand the difference in that way. So when you go out somewhere, the man can say to the woman, it's like, I remember we got there, but I don't remember how we get there. Can you fill me in? Or she might say, like, can you be direct and get this focus? Because I've got so much going on. Like when you understand your own, I want to say limitations, but differences, and you can benefit from each other, that changes the paradigm of how you relate to each other. And also changes how you present to the world as a couple. So there's gifts in this.
Yes, being able to, I think, acknowledge the differences. It took me, I would say I went through the old Kubler-Ross theories, 5 stages of grief, probably all in one weekend. I was like, what? It does. Okay, we need to take a pause. How many people have I hurt with this lack of information? And then understanding and appreciating the differences is, like you're saying, it's that next step.
Yeah.
How being that we're not both constantly in gathering mode all the time, always telling, the stories, or often telling the stories with all the details, that can be infuriating. And I remember going back home to my own family of origin and seeing my mom in the full gathering mode. Nothing wrong with it, no judgment. It's so starkly different than that testosterone driven single focus. What is the question? What is the point? Not the journey to get there. And we hear this too in passing when we're like, okay, and then we'll do this. Boom, boom, boom. We go different steps, and my partner's like, what? And I'm like, oh, I'm just talking to myself. Don't worry about it. I just got to run through all the checklist that I needed, right. And how hardwired for safety and security we are. And when I work with couples, men typically who have, very stable jobs, they're sitting there confused. I am providing security. I'm very financially there's this conflation with there's financial security, there's financial safety that is helpful, separate from how we as women are describing safety. So I'd love to hear your perspective on how you would define and explore safety for women. What we mean.
Well, one of the biggest things I learned to this work for me around women was, and I didn't know I had it innately in one form, but I evolved into a much stronger place, was understanding that when I create, I'm going to say it another way, the feminine energy is like movement, it's life, it's vitality, it's the light. They shine brightly and women rock this way. The masculine, though, is presencing. One of the gifts that we have as masculine men, when we own our masculinity, is a depth of safety and trust and security that women can lean on and not be afraid.
Yes.
The biggest gift that I know around my clients and around my friends, my female friends, is that I can be basically the rock they can lean on, and it works for them.
Yes.
And part of the work I do with my clients is by demonstration, because they may not have been with a man like that before. So when I coach them in a relationship and they go looking out there and they're like, well, so they remember how it felt when we were talking. Say they would, you go and meet a man out there, that you find a man you can lean on, because a lot of men out there don't know how to lean on themselves and trust themselves to be solid enough to stand on their own 2 feet. So part of this work is for women to understand that men can be there for them, to create that safety that isn't financial safety, it is really emotional safety.
Mm-hmm.
And for women, especially women who are in the feminine, sometimes they need that lighthouse to find their way home.
Right.
We need the lighthouse of the feminine when we're out hunting to find our way back, because we can't always navigate that well.
Mm-hmm.
But the woman, when she's busy doing so many things, to have something solid that she can base herself on, energetically speaking, is so powerful that she can then go, "Thank you, I can trust you."
Mm-hmm.
Yes, if he has the financial security, great, but that emotional security and that stability of energetics of saying he's reliable, she can count on him.
Mm-hmm.
That's fun. It's a relationship. That ability to trust. I mean, I used to say many years ago, before I even knew this work, was the three main qualities of a healthy relationship was honesty, trust, and communication.
Yeah.
And having that ability to trust each other, because the part of it also is for men to trust a woman that her energetically movement doesn't mean she's going to leave necessarily.
Yes.
But also that she brings so much gifts to the relationship that he can't or won't be able to do.
Mm-hmm.
Masculine and feminine masculine energy is one thing, feminine energy does another. So really honoring both differences, because the other part is the more those two are honored, the greater the attraction is.
Yes.
Which is a whole other level we talk about.
Yes, I'm smiling and basking in your description of that, because it brings me to think of my partner who I'm with now, who at any other point we would not have been a match, and so delighted to spend the rest of my life with him, because he is that emotional security, that lighthouse in the storm, so even keel,
Yeah.
so secure, very loving family, very big family, feels so welcoming and so open. And from the beginning, I even tell him this when we were first communicating, before we have, video dates and then our in-person date. This was a while ago. He was texting me and I was just like, wow, he asks a lot of questions. And typically, like, this is annoying. Like, why? What is going on here? And then I took a breath and I said, hold yourself, Talia. This is what you've been wanting. Let's lean in. Let's see. Is this discomfort because I'm worried it'll leave? Am I worried it's disingenuous? Or am I meeting this person who's like ready to give me what I made a deal with the universe that I was ready for? And it was, thankfully, that one. And I'm so glad that I took the leap and didn't go into that old conditioning and just shut it off on an assumption or an attempt to make myself feel safe, because I love the level to which we communicate. And for myself, especially in my feminine, that's what I want to be able to lean in, and how I base my trust. Will you be there for me when I need you, when I want to share something with you, and vice versa? How can I be a safe person for him to tell the truth to? And how can we have more of an aligned partnership where we each rely on our strengths and then help each other and not shame each other in our areas of growth? Because we're humans, we're going to mess up. There's times I mess up. Even being clinically trained, I think I have more blind spots than most people who don't have that awareness, because I try so hard to not bring that into the relationship. Sometimes I overcorrect.
Well, that's the thing. You need to reckon. One of the gifts is you can use your partner as a mirror if they're willing to, and they can redo that for you. Because the real mirror may not show you back to yourself the way you need to see yourself, because you see yourself the way you already are.
Yes.
One analogy I want to provide, just as a little hint at how the masculine and feminine can work together in a relationship, again from one of my teachers, is that the feminine energy is like a massive river coming down the side of a mountain.
Mm-hmm.
It's powerful, it's really potent, it's working its way down through the forest, down to the ocean. The masculine is the river banks. So the masculine creates the structure which the river can flow through, because if there's no river banks, there's no river. But also the river banks are only at the mercy of the river not bursting the banks. So recognize the power of the feminine.
Yes.
And understanding how they work together, because again, if the masculine energy wasn't providing the security and safety for that structure, then the feminine would just become a lake energetically. So there wouldn't be any emotion, wouldn't be dynamism, there wouldn't be any power there. So they both masculine and feminine are very powerful together in creating this gestalt that is greater than the sum of the parts.
Yes. Yes. I think being able to safely rely on one another, and something I work on with my clients as well, is being able to really embrace the feeling of the ability to depend on someone is starkly different than being dependent upon someone.
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah.
To learn, basically, this is the evolution I went through and understand is, and I did a video series on YouTube called Cracking the Codependency Code with a friend of mine. But it's basically understanding that codependency, the challenges, and this again, overlaying the sexual revolution through the 80s and 90s of women working independently, is that basically women were in a codependent functional relationship with men because of the way that they were raised back then. Sexual revolution happened, women got independence.
Mm-hmm.
Do their own thing, run their own show. They could date any man they wanted. They weren't under the control anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not working either. The evolution we're moving into is interdependence, which is where you get to add to each other and have this, not enmeshment, but connection, so you can actually complement each other, but be growing bigger than you were before. That's the true relationship.
Yes. I think moments of, as one of my mentors says, moments of connection and then individuation help you to develop your own, in a soft and receptive way, as a feminine, independence. I can care for myself. I am able to support myself and sustain myself, because the I guess caveat or danger becomes if there is that feeling where it's too helpless, or like you're saying, there's no riverbanks at all, and we are too largely reliant or feel too dependent on financial security, or, oh, I'll just look for a man to solve, the white knight. I'll just have him fix everything. We don't, if we really understand and we see the full movie, you don't really want that based on when you see how it ends. But there is that familiar concept that we're raised on with media and with certain books and narratives and tall tales that get passed down through familial generations. Oh, and then everything was great, and then I had kids and it was this, and then there's no emotional availability to discuss what may have been lacking or what may have been missing with those 20s, 30s, 40s housewives. There maybe wasn't even language to discuss what the lack was, and being too financially dependent on a man, there was no way out. So there was not even a way, I think, for the brain to voice to them, hey, what if your life was this instead? Because it was never going to be a reality. And then when it became a reality, I think we pendulum swung too far in the opposite direction of trash, we don't need them at all, which horrifies me that we would have ever said that, because men are amazing. And being able to look at men and realize how amazing the differences are, it takes a learned practice. Trust me, I did not start out like this. But I'm so glad that I gifted myself with changing that narrative. Again, never have had better relationships with any of the men in my life until I learned how to stop expecting men to be like other women.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, just to be transparent, back in I first started doing personal development work, I was in an advanced seminar where we did some practices, and at basically the end of it, one of the guys called me a white knight. I proceeded to put a license plate in my car, because my car was white, that said white knight. And for about 3 or 4 years after that point, I kept saving damsels in distress, which sounded heroic, but it sucked. Because I was totally in a place where I had women dependent upon me in a way that wasn't healthy.
Right.
And it was feeding a part of me, but part of me was aware enough at that point to go, this isn't right, this isn't healthy. But it's all I could manage at the point to get get what I wanted, so to speak, in quotes. But the thing is, what you said is so true. The evolution, I mean, I've got a few more years on you, so I've been on this path for a lot longer, but also I wish I had these skills like 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I'm grateful I have it now, or in the last 15 years, but understanding the power of owning our true natures as masculine and feminine people. And just to qualify, by the way, this is true of gay and straight relationships, also true. Some women are more masculine naturally than men are. Some women are more feminine than other women are. So understanding the polarity, actually put this piece on the table. True attraction in relationship comes from the extremes of masculine and feminine polarity. Like I mentioned, it was a spectrum. And the more we can be at each end of the spectrum, the greater the attraction is going to be, like magnets. The more powerful the magnets are that pull us together. And that is what makes relationships so successful and powerful and sexually fulfilling, is when you have that connection that works that way. One of the things, just to say this, there's a piece that we've had to your audience, my audience too. One of my teachers taught me about was how when a man or woman, especially if you go through your day and you're spending time with the feminine and the masculine, both places, because of work, because of life, whatever it is, when you come home, you may not remember where you should be or where you want to be, and it's going to be hard to navigate back to that. So when you go to bed together and have sex, part of me's like, not sure you're in it. So one of these practices that my teacher said to me was, understand that when you're both together in a relationship in the bedroom before you get into bed together, is take a moment to make a ritualistic choice to have the man gather up all his feminine energy he's used during the day, symbolically, like into a bundle he has in his hands, give it to his woman for safekeeping. Then she does the same thing with the feminine energy, sorry, masculine energy used during the day, all the driving, getting things done, making things happen, gather all the energy up herself, give it to him for safekeeping. Because it changes, for a start, the connection, but it also adds to the attraction because it creates a different playfulness, and also it shifts the energy. Because the other thing is it brings you present to where you are. Because most couples, oftentimes sex is an afterthought because they've had such a crazy day. This makes it intentional and ritualistic, which is powerful. So,
and much hotter.
yes,
I will leave that, much hotter, and it feels the after effects of when it is in alignment. It's like a shockwave throughout the next 24 to 48 hours that it's like this warm blanket. You just kind of like think back like, ooh, that was, and you text each other about it throughout the day. Or you text
yeah,
it really does set the tone, not only for the act, but it's a safeguard for the rest of the relationship that keeps you craving each other and wanting more and wanting to keep that polarity in place. That's why transition time is also remarkably helpful as well. When we get home, give each other 15 to 20 minutes physiologically to adjust whatever energy we were in throughout the day, work mode versus me mode. I'm at home. I'm in the presence of my partner and or my family. How am I going to navigate through that? And I love the ritual that you talked about. It is chef's kiss. So powerful.
Well, the thing is also it makes the relationship more sacred. Yes,
Yeah.
even in the sexual component, because frankly, why not bring more sacredness into and reverence into the relationship? Because we often sometimes forget that. And I'm thinking that when we can bring that into our relationship and we honor each other, and by extension, the more we honor ourselves, we change everything. So
Yeah, it starts within ourself first, and it's so powerful in a grounding way when we can do the work on ourself, and it's not a rush to, oh well, the other person has to do the work also, and what if they don't, and I can't. It's much less frantic than that, and there's this realization and awareness, this makes an impact on me and it will make an impact on the world the way
right.
that it do, and that it's more open, it's more receptive as a woman especially. It's powerful because it opens up the floodgates of men very quickly after you start to change the way you interact with them, and it's almost like an opposite quality problem to be like, okay, now I have all the matches I never thought possible all at once. How do I weed through them?
Be very careful and selective. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. Do you have any final, and I want to have you on again and learn from you and spend an entire weekend picking your brain.
Thank you.
Aside from that own personal desire, do you have any final wisdom to share with the audience?
Well, the thing is, I mean, to quote Shakespeare, to thine own self be true. However, do you know who that self is?
Yeah.
Like what you do and what I do with clients, oftentimes what we're helping them do is really discover who they really are and to realign themselves back to themselves. So frankly, if you feel like something's missing, like find out what it is and get help to navigate back to yourself. So being true to ourselves is one of the things that a lot of people have forgotten how to do in the world, in life, and they put on them. And getting back to some of the teaching and study with, it talks about how we put on the mask and the layers. I mean, I know for myself, in my deepest core, I know that I'm a masculine man, but I put on layers of being the nice guy, being more feminine, being this and that and the other. So most of us do carry these shells, these masks on. So when we meet somebody else, we end up being so masked up. And I don't mean like the pandemic. I mean literally layers of protections. So that basically there's 17 layers and 17 layers the other person. We don't connect.
No.
So being true to ourselves means to be willing to drop all those masks and own the power and magnificence of who we really are. And when we do that with each other, miracles happen.
I think that's where shadow work especially comes in
Yes.
clutch, because the persona gets to come away and we meet those dark parts of ourselves that we're typically very afraid of and afraid of other people ever even knowing exist in us, let alone seeing it.
Right.
terrifying. But once you go there with yourself and you integrate that part of yourself, it's much less terrifying. If anybody ever mentions it to you, I like to say, you know, what you own about yourself, another person can't use against you. If somebody made a comment, oh, you're so, you know, easygoing. If it's a positive thing, we want to relate to it. We're magnetic to it. Oh, yes, I am that thing. But then deep down, what if we're very neurotic and frantic? We're like, yeah, so easygoing, me, yeah, for sure. No, like, don't know the real you versus, yeah, but I, you know, I can also be pretty structured at times and have my way with what I want my life to be. It's how you talk about what you've owned about yourself that
Yeah.
is also very attractive to the people you're around. And show your human side. I wouldn't dump everything on the person on the first date, but that's
No.
what Mr. or a coach would be for. let us let us be the container. You can fall apart, put back together, and then go out and be your authentic self in the world.
Yeah, and it also helps to be with somebody who's been through the journey themselves. I mean, I've had more than one dark night of the soul. Uh,
Same.
one of my favorite things, because I've been a spiritual for years. Come from a Jewish background, but religion's not my thing, and so I talk about how oftentimes, you know, religion's for people afraid of hell, spirituality is for people who've been there.
Yep.
And so in this work, the dark side, so to speak, or dealing with the depths of those things that we're maybe ashamed of or feeling guilt for, are so important to face, resolve, and make peace with, so we can move forward. Because otherwise, we're dragging these weights behind us that are slowing us down. And if we want to have an amazing relationship or amazing life, do the work. It's worth it.
Perfect. So, thank you so much for your time, Barry.
A
This was,
pleasure.
I would like more. So I for
We'll
more. We can chat more on how to connect. I'd love to meet you in person. Thank you again so much for your time and your knowledge. You are a wealth of wisdom. Anybody who works with you is very, very lucky.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And thank you for being the invitation in the first place. I'm glad we got to do this. And we'll do it again.
Yes, sounds good. Have a great afternoon.
You too. Take care.